Wow, it is a good morning to be in the house of the Lord and to worship. And I was almost in tears in the front row, which, if you know me very well, does not happen very easily, because I was just thinking back. This is not in the sermon notes there, buddy, but I was just thinking back to October. October, we started this weird, crazy thing called Restoration Church, and we had like 3 or 4 families, and that was what it was. And it was a small group we were calling a church. And to look around this morning and to see all these faces and all these people that God has brought into the life and are engaged in the life of this church is just it's just amazing. I sit back and I go, that is a waymaker type of thing to me, because if it's not a me thing, it's not an anybody else thing, it's a waymaker, God making a way where there seems to be no way. And so I think it's good for us to just pause sometimes and remember and to remind ourselves of the testimonies of who God is in the midst of all of this, right? That these are not just words on a page, although they are that, but these are quite literally lived experiences for us. Well, this morning I'm going to start, if it's okay, and if it's not, I have the microphone, so I don't really know what we would do if it's not okay. But this is what we're going to do: is I'm going to start with a little confession time. Okay, every confession is good for the soul, and I need apparently to do some confession time, because this might be something you struggle with as well. It might be something that's completely foreign to you, although I would push back against that, because I don't think this is really foreign to any of us. But some of us like to act like it's foreign to us. But one of the things about myself that I really don't like to admit, but it's going on almost all the time beneath the surface, is that I tend to care a bit more than I should about what other people think, or might be thinking, or might possibly be thinking, or probably aren't thinking, but I think that they're thinking about me at any given moment in time. Now, some of you are like, I don't care what anybody else thinks, but I would push back against that, because I think you do. You just don't like to say that you do, which is where I was and have been for most of my life. But it's one of those things. I care a lot about it. In fact, a few years ago, my wife and I, we were introduced to a certain personality kind of paradigm understanding. You can take it or leave it. It's not about this, but it's called the Enneagram. Some of you may know it and love it. Some of you may hate it. That's fine. I'm not saying I love it or hate it. I'm just saying this was a story of a thing that happened, okay, here. And I realize there's different opinions on usefulness and engagement such as this, but the idea is that there's 9 different personality types that are kind of out there. We all kind of fall into one of these 9 different personality types. We all uniquely display them, but we kind of helps us to understand who we are a little bit there. My wife is what's known as a 2, which means she's a helper. She is never thinking about herself. She's always thinking about other people and how I can help others, and it's a perfect fit for her, and she derives a lot of her sense and her worth and meaning from being able to come alongside of others and to help others. I am a 3, which is known as an achiever. And a 3 is one of those things, if you know this, a lot of times what happens is you read these paradigms, these understandings for a personality, and your first thought when you read your kind of thing is not, oh yeah, that's me, woohoo, awesome, someone finally gets me. Usually your first thought is, oh, that's me. Someone just read my diary and knows the deep inner workings of what's really going on behind me that I try not to let the rest of the world see. Because 3s are achievers, which means I love to get a lot of stuff done and accomplish goals and milestones, but the downside is that I really care a lot about what other people think about me. In fact, I kind of shape-shift a little bit, and I can kind of be a little different in certain situations and contexts based off of what I think the people there might want me to be and how I want to be engaging with that. I remember the first time I read that, it was like, ooh, someone has been reading what goes on in the deep recesses of who I am, and it doesn't feel great. I feel exposed. But whether you live in that boat as with me or not, I think there's this common human emotion or feeling within us that pulls us to care about what other people think to some degree or another. Maybe you're not don't care quite as much as I kind of do, but my guess is that you still have that. We may push down the urge, we may act like it doesn't exist, but in the end, the truth is you'd rather fit in than be an outcast, correct? Like in most situations, you'd rather not be an outcast in that situation. It feels weird, not nice to be an outcast. You'd rather fit in. In other words, you'd like people to like you at the end of the day. In other words, you care what they think about you. All right? All right? That's what that means at the end of the day. At the end of the day, okay? That's what it is, all right? Most of us, want other people to like us and to fit in. We'd rather others think well of us, right? Usually we want people to think nicely of us, than not. We usually don't go into a nice cocktail party and sit there, I'm going to try to see how many people I can get to hate me in about 45 minutes, and I'm going to walk out that door. We don't do that, right? We sit there and we go, no, I'm going to try to get engaged with people. We care what people think, right? We all care at some level or another what other people think. And it creates a problem sometimes too, right? Like it's a good thing in a lot of ways. We connect with folks, we find places of connection, but it can lead us to maybe do certain things or engage in certain ways because we assume others are going to be okay with some things, but they might not be okay with these other things that are there. We fear what other people might think or what they might say, and so it shapes how we act or how we engage or what we do. And so in our scripture passage this week, we're going to be picking up the story of David again. This is our fourth week in this. We only have one more week that we're going to be in this area of looking at David's story. And we finally are getting to the point in time that David is officially the king of Israel. There's been some crazy things that have happened since the last passage that we looked at, where he was running around the wilderness and dealing with all sorts of things like that. But David finally has become the king of Israel. He finally jumps into the situation. He comes face to face with this fact that when you find yourself in a place of leadership, any sort of leadership, I don't mean like you have to be like the president or you have to be, in charge of these different things, or the CEO of your company, or a business leader, or this, that, and the other. I mean like if you're a parent, you're a leader in your family, right? If you're the oldest sibling, you tend to find yourself as a leader of your rest of your. If you're a youngest sibling, you know that you're the real leader of the family. The older siblings just haven't figured that out yet. Like, all right, that's the deal right there, right, Q? We're the leaders, right? We're in charge of things, right? The real leaders of the family, right? And so, like, we all find ourselves in some positions of leadership there. And the thing is that we find ourselves, just like David, when we get yourselves in the positions of leadership, you will find very quickly that others disapprove of some of the stuff that you choose to do. Parenting is a great example of this. We don't let our kids just have ice cream every time they ask for it, like for breakfast in the morning. They disapprove of that decision, usually when we bring that down, right? And so there's a disapproval. Others disapprove of our decisions. And if you're like me, we tend to care about that. And this story is a story of David dealing with that disapproval of others, that place where he's caught between others disapproving of what's going on and him having to try to do what is right and do what is there. And it's a great story for us to be thinking about what it means to serve and to worship God well. But first, a little bit of context. All right, Saul was the king before, and his son Jonathan, who was David's kind of BFF, all right, they both have been killed in battle. They went to war, they've been in this battle, and in the same battle, both of them are killed in this battle, which inevitably means that David has been officially identified as the new king of all of Israel, and he's consolidating his kingdom and trying to bring everybody together following this horrific thing that's happened in the life of this place. And he begins to engage as a king, and he is good at it. All right, he not only is a good leader, but then he also is a good military leader. So he starts taking back land that was taken from the Israelites. He starts extending the reign of the people, and people love him because people love a winner, right? And he is winning and winning and winning all over the place. And so he's defeating these enemies they've had for hundreds of years. And as part of his leadership, David kind of has a goal, a vision, you might say, of what's going to happen. He has this vision of having the Ark of the Covenant, which is this piece of, this is a really crass way of saying it's a piece of furniture, all right? But it's a piece of furniture that's an extremely important piece in the religious life of the Israelites. This was literally seen to be the place, they believed this was the place, there was also, the top of it was called the mercy seat, and this was the place where literally they believed that God's literal presence dwelt with them. Inside the ark, it sort of has a cabinet type of features that are in there. They threw things like the original tablets of the second version of the tablets of the 10 Commandments, because the first ones ended up as gravel on the side of a mountain. But the tablets for the 10 Commandments. Aaron's staff that budded even though it wasn't supposed to, and these amazing things to remind them of who God has been in the past and who he is going forward. It is a monumentally important item in the religious life of the Israelites at this time, and he wants to bring it to Jerusalem, the new capital city of the nation of Israel that he has conquered and he is setting up as the center of this kingdom. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. He's trying to move this, and we're going to pick it up. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 6 that's here, and this is where we're going to pick up the story. If you want to follow along in your Bibles, you can. Otherwise, it'll be on the screen here. And it says this, "Then David again gathered all the elite troops in Israel, 30,000 in all, and he led them to Baalah of Judah and back to bring back the ark of God, which bears the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. They placed the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from Abinadab's house, which was on a hill. Uzzah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, were guiding the cart that carried the ark of God. Ahio walked in front of the ark, and David and all the people of Israel were celebrating before the Lord, singing songs and playing all kinds of musical instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, cymbals. But when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand and steadied the ark of God. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him dead because of this. So Uzzah died right there beside the ark of God, and David was angry because of the Lord's anger had burst out against Uzzah. He named that place Perez Uzzah, which means to burst out against Uzzah, as it is still called to this day. Let's just pause there for a second. So David decides he's going to move this ark. He's going to move it from the place of Abinadab's house, it's just been chilling out, I guess, kind of hanging out at Abinadab's house for a while. And David decides he's going to move it, and he wants to move it there. And so he summons this large group of people. They're singing, there's dancing, they're celebrating before the Lord, they're worshiping as they move this most important of religious symbols toward Jerusalem. And then tragedy strikes out of nowhere, right? One of the oxen stumbles. And presumably that makes the ark, which is on a cart, kind of do one of these things. It starts to wobble, or it starts to look unsteady. And so Uzzah, probably trying to be very helpful, decides he's going to stick his hand out and touch the ark to try to steady it, presumably, at the end of this, which seems like, let's be honest, a really reasonable thing and nice thing to do, right? Like, hey, the thing's going down. It's really important. Let me help steady it. And then he dies because of that. What? Like, that's one of those crazy moments in Scripture. Like, I don't know if you get these, but I get these all the time, where you read something and you're like, huh? Like, what in the world? Why in the world did that happen? What in the world is going on here? And what's amazing is that David has the same response. His response out of this is not like, oh man, you shouldn't have done that. That was awful. Like, that was the worst thing you could have done. His response is, what's going on, Lord? What are you doing? What is the big deal? Why? What is going on here? And you know what's interesting is that I have heard pastor after pastor preach sermon after sermon about this. And you know what's amazing is that all those pastors seem to have the reason why Uzzah is struck dead here, which is really ironic, because you know what the Scripture never tells us? Is the reason why Uzzah was struck dead, except for he touched it. He just says that's just what happened at the end of the day. It leaves us kind of in this limbo, and we can fill in the blanks. We can try to say it's because it was a holy item and we, all these different things. But I think what maybe is more important is not trying to figure out the right reasons why someone accidentally touch a cart the wrong way and end up God striking us dead by accident at the end of the day. I think maybe the point of this whole beginning section maybe has something to say about David's response to this. Because it's not easy for David to reconcile with this extremely wild and unsettling and difficult part of this passage. David gets angry actually over it. It says that he's angry with God because God is angry about this situation. And this isn't the main idea of where we're going with this message, but I really felt compelled as I was preparing this that we needed to quickly share this, because it just might be that this is the word of the Lord that someone might need to hear this morning. And it's this. Did you notice that God doesn't strike David dead for being angry with God's action? God can deal with your anger and your frustrations about him and what he is doing in your life and around you. He can deal with your strong emotions when we can't seem to make sense of what is going on because we're in the middle of the situation and it seems like nothing makes sense. You do not have to hide your emotions from God when things don't seem okay. Somewhere along the way, we got this wrong, church. We got this wrong, that somehow we felt like we had to like powder puff all of our feelings when we don't get what's going on in the moment. And here's what I want to say. If your God is offended by your anger, your God is really small. That's a really small God, that he can't take the emotions that he placed in you in the first place. My God's big enough to take that. You know whose God's big enough to take that? It's David's God's big enough to take that. Because all through the Psalms, you know what David's first half of a lot of his Psalms are? What in the world are you doing, God? I don't get what's going on. Why have you forsaken me? What is going on here? Why are my enemies winning? Why am I losing? Why is everything awful? Why is all this happening to me? It's a common refrain over and over again. God is big enough to deal with your anger and your frustrations. And if your God is not big enough to do that, your God needs to grow. Your picture and understanding of God needs to grow and be big enough, because he's big enough for your frustrations. He can take it. Let me just say it this way. If you walked into my office tomorrow morning and you gave me 20 frustrations that you had with what I'm doing and our leadership and where the church is going, might make me a little angry at first, but you know what I would do? I would say thank you for your input. I'd say bye. I'd go get a new cup of coffee, and I'd go back to my work. And I would assess whether that's helpful information or not at the end of the day, right? If I can deal with frustrations, God can deal with those frustrations. If we can deal with each other's frustrations, our God can deal with our frustrations. If we can deal with each other's strong emotions, our God can so much more deal with that. He's big enough for him, he can take it, and he would actually rather hear from you how you honestly feel than get some sanitized version that is not actually how you feel. All right, that's not the sermon. That was for free. That was extra right there. That was some extra stuff that was there. Because in that anger and that frustration, David halts his plan. He sits there and goes, okay, people are dying now because of this whole thing. We need to rethink the plan. And so he literally stops the procession, because someone dying in the middle of it is a big buzzkill to the celebration of moving the Ark of the Lord. And so he stops everything. They just leave the Ark there near Abinadab's house, and it's just moved into this new house of this new guy whose name is Obed-Edom. All right? And while the Ark is at Obed-Edom's house, what happens is that Obed-Edom's family and his household just see blessing after blessing after blessing happen over and over and over again. Like everything is going right for them because the Ark of the Lord is sitting there in their house and is with them the whole time. And eventually David hears about that and he goes, I want some of that. It's cool that you're being blessed, Obed-Edom, but we've brought that to Jerusalem. That'd be really awesome. So he goes, let's try this again. So we're going to pick up the story in verse 12 again. It says, then King David was told, the Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's household and everything he has because of the Ark of God. So David went there and he brought the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with a great celebration. After the men who were carrying the Ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. In other words, we would have to do this twice on just this platform right here, probably about 4 times just to move the width of the sanctuary. Every 6 steps, David sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. That is a barbecue going on right there. That is a barbecue happening constantly, over and over and over again. And David danced before the Lord with all of his might, wearing a priestly garment. So David and all the people of Israel brought the ark of the Lord with shouts and joys and blowing of ram's horns. And as the ark of the Lord entered the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, who was also David's wife, looked down from her window. And when she saw King David, her husband, leaping and dancing before the Lord, she was filled with contempt for him. So David summons this whole procession again, right? But this time, he takes everything that was like, it was a good party before, and he decides to crank it up to 11. Like, he just takes it and just goes, we're going all the way up with everything, pulling all the stops off. Everything is there. There's sacrifices every 6 steps. Worship is taking place everywhere. There's music, there's singing, there's dancing even. And David allows for himself, the king, in the middle of all this, to get caught up in the midst of all of it. He is not going to be a bystander to the worship of the Lord and the engaging in this. So he wears a linen ephod, which is a priestly garment there, all right? And he begins to dance and to worship before the Lord in a way in which he is in that place where he's worshiping like no one else is around. You ever been there? Maybe it's in your car at some point in time where you're worshiping and it's like, it doesn't matter that you are way off from the key that song is actually sung in, and no one can sing a Chris Tomlin song in his key to begin with in the first place, but you're going to give it your best the whole way through, and you're going after that high note, and you know it sounds awful, but you are just going for it. Like, it's like that, but he is just out there in the middle of everybody doing that. And no one seems to care. Except for one person. His wife, the daughter of Saul, awkward family dynamics there, right? All right. So his wife, who's the daughter of his predecessor, who was trying to kill him, Michal, and she sees her husband, the king of the entire nation, dancing in procession, and all she can think about is how that is not how the king is supposed to be. That is not what it's supposed to look like to be the king in this way. That is not befitting of your position and your title. This expression of praise is not okay. And she's not shy with this criticism. It's not like she held this contempt and just kind of kept it to herself. No. In verse 20, we pick it up and it says, when David returned home to bless his own family, he comes home to bless his own family, all right? Michal, the daughter of Saul, comes out to meet him, and she said in disgust, which means put as much dripping sarcasm on these words as you possibly can, how distinguished the king of Israel looked today, shamelessly exposing himself to the servants' girls like any vulgar person might do. I came home to bless you, but I'm not so sure where this is going at this point in time. David responds to Michal. And before we read the response, I just want to make clear that we could read this, and maybe at one level we could read this as maybe an interaction that maybe we've had before, where we walked in the door of the house after we're really excited about something, and our spouse or our kids or somebody sits there, and all of a sudden we just get smacked with something that just, that hurts. And if you're like me or you're a human being, we've had those moments where we just fired off whatever popped up in this head. The filter was gone, and it just came right out, and it was an emotional response. I do not believe that this response from David is an emotional response. I don't believe this was just like, I'm just going to zing her with whatever is next and try to just lay her out. I think this was a measured response. In addition to that, I also want to say that this is not a response that negates the importance of listening to wise counsel and having good people who can correct our actions when they actually are off. There are places where we all get off base, and we need people to go, that's not okay there. You can't do that. That's not all right. You can't say those things. You can't that's not okay. We need those people in our lives. But this response, I believe, is one that is built out of a heart that has been yielded to God and properly prioritizes the Lord above anything and everything else. David says this, as David retorted, that's a great word, SAT word there, to Michal, I was dancing before the Lord who chose me above your father and all his family. He appointed me as the leader of Israel, the people of the Lord, so I celebrate before the Lord. Yes, I am willing to look even more foolish than this, even to be humiliated in my own eyes. But those servant girls you mentioned will indeed think that I am distinguished at the end of the day. There you go. Yeah. David shares, I've got no regrets. I've got no regrets about how I've worshiped the Lord. Not because he doesn't value Michal's opinion, not because she's not important to him, not any of that, but because he values what God thinks way more than he values what any other person thinks, even the woman he has to go home to. And he bases his actions in who God is and what God has done for him, not in what others might be thinking about him. You see, out of what God has done for David, David states that he would be willing to, in other translations says, become even more undignified than this. In other words, they think this is undignified. I'd be willing to go even more undignified, even more foolish, to be humiliated if it meant that it gave God worship at the end of the days. In other words, he's willing to look even sillier, even more foolish, if it means that God's glorified and God is worshipped. David's focus is on what God desires and what God deserves over and above what others might think or what they might say or where they might be going. David shows something that, quite frankly, for me, it has taken a really long time for me to grasp. And I tell you, I'll be honest, I still struggle with this to this very day. And it's this. It is impossible to worship God fully when we have one eye on other people. It is impossible to worship God fully when we have one eye on other people and everyone else around us. Inevitably, if we've got one eye on what other people are thinking, we can't give our all to God because our part of us is worried about what they're going to be thinking or what they're going to say or how they might construe that or where they might go. It is impossible to worship God fully when we have one eye on other people. Honestly, this was a lesson that I think I first really learned at a Waterboys men's choir rehearsal. Many, many years ago, I was just fresh out of college, and I went to, it wasn't here, they were at some other church downtown here, and when I first walked into a choir rehearsal, I was kind of intimidated. I kind of knew one or two people, not anybody else, and this is a group of people from all sorts of backgrounds, and there's some loud personalities, there's some crazy guys in there, and they've got some stories in their past. Am I right, Curtis? All right, it can be intimidating when you're not used to that group to come in and engage with that group. And so when I first walked in, I was intimidated, I'll be honest, and there were all sorts of men in the room, all sorts of backgrounds, so I wanted to fit in. I was like, I want to fit in, I want to be one of the guys, I want to be cool, act cool, act cool. That's kind of was my mantra, just act cool, just be cool, all right, the whole time. And everything in my life up to that point in time had taught me, if you want to fit in and you want to be one of the guys, you got to play it cool, which means don't show any emotion, just kind of act like everything's cool all the time, it's all good, all right? You don't want to act like anything, like no over the top, just kind of like, it's good. We're all good here. Just nothing much. Just kind of keep it right here. And then we started singing. And I looked around the room, and there are men of all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of situations, and there are men just lifting their hands up in worship like no one matters at all. I literally saw a guy hit somebody else in the face because they were so in worship, they didn't realize there was a person next to them where their hand was gonna, like the guy just took it, okay, cool, and he's good. Like he is just, they're just engaged in it. There were guys with tears streaming down their faces, singing loudly anywhere. They couldn't carry a tune if their life depended on it, but it didn't matter. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in the back corner, because that's where if you're going to play it cool, you play it cool back there, or back there. Okay, that's where you try to play it cool from. I'm in the back corner trying to play it cool, and I don't know what in the world's going on, because I'm afraid of doing every single one of those things, afraid of sticking out. simply because I don't want to be seen as weird or uncool or not fitting in their eyes. And I started to realize that the issue was not with them, the issue was with me. They had something that I needed in my life, because we need to care a whole lot more about what God thinks and what He deserves from us in worship than about what others might be thinking. Because this is actually really, Scripture tells us this is the true basis of genuine worship. Paul, when he's talking to the church in Rome, he shares these words in Romans 12:1. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind you will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship." In other words, when we give everything to God, when we sacrifice our everything to Him, we give ourselves fully over to Him and worry about Him and Him alone, that is truly what it looks like to be a worshiper. Our sacrifice of ourselves, which for a lot of us is our sacrifice of our ego, our sacrifice of what we think others might think about us, our sacrifice of what others might think, is actually our true and genuine act of worship. The thing I've come to understand to be true and has been healing for this guy here, who tends to care way too much about what others think, is that most people at the end of the day, you're going to laugh at this, but let it sink in, because it's a truth in the middle of it. Here's the actual truth, and it's been freeing for me, is that most people, they aren't thinking. That's a period right there. That's just, most people that you think are thinking about you, first of all, they're not even thinking, actually, all right? Like there's nothing going through their head. And the ones that are thinking, they're not thinking about you. There's a lot of other things they got to think about, and you're not on the top 10 list at the end of the day. They're thinking about whether they left the oven on. They're thinking about whether they need to get laundry done. They're thinking about how they need to get things together for work. They're thinking about how many kids' activities you got to spend stuff to. They're thinking about all these other things. You are not in their top 10. Most people aren't thinking, and the ones that are probably aren't thinking about you. So with that in mind, I want to ask a few questions about what maybe God is calling you to, but you haven't taken action on. Maybe you haven't taken action on because you're a little bit worried about what others might think or where they might engage, or what it might look like to do that. Some of us know that we've been called by God to fully sell out to Jesus, that Jesus is not just meant to be, I'll say it again for you, our health insurance policy at the end of the day, but He's supposed to be our whole world. It's not just about when we die, are we going to go to the hot place or the cool place at the end of the day. It's about who are we living our life for today before that day ever shows up. And a lot of us have treated Jesus as if He's like a good luck charm to get out of jail free at the end of our lives when we breathe our last, instead of realizing that He desires followers and disciples of His today who, will enjoy something in the future and life eternal with Him. Some of us are afraid to fully sell out to Jesus because we're worried what others might think at the end of the day. Some of us are afraid to declare out loud our belief in Jesus. We've believed in Jesus for a while, but we don't want anybody else to really know about it. We just kind of keep that to ourselves. We kind of show up. We don't do that thing. But we are a little worried to share with others that we are a follower of Jesus, because what are they going to think? And what might they say if they find out that we're one of those Christian people? Even worse, we go to church. They only knew. This was one that never dawned on me until a couple years ago, that some of us have not taken the step to get baptized because we are afraid of what others might think when we decide to make that decision to get into the waters of baptism and actually to be baptized. And for some of us, God might be calling us to do that, but we haven't taken that action because we're a little worried about what that might look like or where that might go. For some of us, it's sharing our testimony, the story of what God has done in our lives. We get so clammy and worried about what others are going to think about just a story that of who God has been to us and what He's done for us and how He's engaged with us. Maybe God's calling us to share our testimony with someone, or just to reach out to that other person, that neighbor, that coworker, that person down the street, the widower, the widow that's living by themselves, just reaching out. Maybe it's inviting somebody to church, or maybe it's to start that new ministry that you're like, no one's going to understand it. Well, if God's calling you to it, then let's get to it. Or maybe it's something even in the business world, something that's out there. It's the starting that new business or pitching that idea to the boss or whatever it is. Only you know what God might be calling you to, that you're going, I don't really want to do that. I'm afraid of where that might take me, what that might look like. The only eyes on you this morning that truly matter are the eyes of the Lord. And He's calling us to live with an audience of one. An audience of one means that there's only one person we're doing this all for. A lot of us live our lives with an audience of a bunch. We treat all these different people in our lives like they're shareholders or stakeholders in the business of who I am, right? We got to keep all the shareholders happy. We got to do this for these people and that for those people and this for these people and those things for those other people. But what if we live for an audience of one and realize that all the other stuff takes care of itself when we put Him first and we live for Him and Him alone? That all the other pieces find their place when we live for that audience of one. Because when we do that, amazing things begin to happen. True worship takes place, not just on a Sunday morning in a sanctuary with music, but true worship in all of our lives takes place. Lives truly begin to change. People come to know Jesus. Restoration, not the church, but that'd be cool too, begins to spread through people's lives and into their families and their neighborhoods and their cities. You know, as we take a chance to worship here in a minute, I just want to put it out there. Let's be the kind of church where we aren't worried first and foremost about what others are going to think at the end of the day. Can we be that kind of church? That church that's not sitting there looking over our shoulder going, I wonder what they're going to think if we do blank. But let's be a church that cares way more and asks the question, not what are they going to think or not how are they going to understand or not what are they going to do, but maybe we ask the question, what is God going to think? What is He calling us to? Where is He moving us toward? Let's be the kind of church that's worried first and foremost about that audience of one. And so this morning we're going to finish in worship, reminding ourselves of who the God that we serve is. And I just want to encourage us in this, that what we do in this sanctuary on Sunday mornings, in many ways, this is the rehearsal, folks. I know you guys had a rehearsal on Wednesday. That's a rehearsal for the rehearsal. Because what we're doing here is supposed to be the thing that reminds us and gives us the reps on what it looks like to be a worshiping people, so that when we walk out those doors and then walk out the next set of doors and get in the cars that we have and we go out into our world, we then can actually be in the game and live a life of worship, not just be people who went to worship once this past week. This is the rehearsal. The game's out there. The gig's out there. This is the practice. And practice is important, all right? This isn't an Allen Iverson moment, all right? This isn't a practice? You're talking about practice? No, this is important. This is the rehearsal so we can go out there and remember who we are. So then those moments where we need to dance before the Lord, we can just dance. Because you know what? We worshiped on Sunday. We were reminded that's who we are. That's what we're about. When we need to say that word and share that testimony, share that story to connect with someone because they're hurting and we know where the answers are found, but they don't know that yet. We don't have to sit there and go, well, I hope they aren't offended because I used the J name at the end of the day, Jesus, or I used God. But we can go, you know what? That is the truest story, and I've been reminded of that. So I can share that without worry about who and what they might think. This is the rehearsal, folks. So we got one more song to rehearse this morning. Because from this, then we will continue to be the church, but we will not be the church gathered after that song. We will then transition to being the church scattered. The church that has been breathed out by the Holy Spirit into the corners of the city of Frederick and Frederick County, to be His church, His hands, His feet, to the world and to the people that we will come around to live out a life of worship there And then, he'll breathe us back in and he'll gather us again so we can rehearse and be reminded of the story that is our story at the center of it, to go do it again. So in these moments, can we just take off the pretenses? Can we stop the looking around? Can we stop worrying about what others think? Can we just lean in? There's a God who is here and wants to commune with us, wants to worship with us, wants to be a part of our worship. Let's not take that for granted. So, Lord, as we come to you in this time, Lord, our whole lives are to be lives of worship, Lord, but Lord, in these moments where we're reminded and rehearsing and who we are and what we're about so we can go and live that out in the world around us, Lord, I pray, Lord, that you would just, if you need to give us blinders, Lord, to be able to not see and think about those that are around us. Lord, would you remind us yet again that the story of David starts with a boy who, it wasn't because he was a great singer, or because he was a great hunter, a great warrior, a great whatever. It was because of his heart, Lord. It was his heart that you were looking at. That's what led you to him, to call and anoint him as his next king. Lord, may you work in our hearts so our hearts would be yielded to you, to worship you with everything that we have. And may that start here. We can look at these next few minutes and say it's just a song, and a song is great, but it's just a song. Or we can say this is giving the Lord of the entire universe the worship that he is due. And we could make ourselves look even more foolish than this, even more undignified than whatever else might happen, and still you would be worthy of more of us, Lord. So take everything away, Lord, and may it just be us and you. And in that, speak to us as we worship you. Jesus, in your name.